Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another Lunch and Learn here as Action Coach in Birmingham. I do hope you're keeping well. We're halfway through the week, and it's great to have another guest with us this lunchtime, Annabella Urel from Stress Free HR. Hi, Annabelle. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Good.
Thank
It's
you for having
really
me.
no problem at all. We're delighted you come and joined us, and we'll learn a bit more about, stress-free HR in a moment. So looking forward to hearing all you've got to share with us. For those of you who are listening to us, you may well be on the Zoom platform, or you may well be on the LinkedIn platform or the Facebook platform. Whichever way you're listening to us this lunchtime, please do engage. Please do ask any questions, any comments, share your thoughts and your experiences of your recruitment process. And I hope it has been as stress-free as I'm sure Annabella is going to share with us this lunchtime. But any questions, and if you're listening to us later on in the day or on YouTube, then again, do reach out and ask any questions, and myself or Annabella will respond later on as well. And we just love to hear, your thoughts and comments. If it's your second time of listening to us, then please do give us a love. Share one of those love hearts. I learned the other day, but the love heart is so much more powerful on Facebook in particular to the algorithm. So do share a bit of love with us this lunchtime so that we can reach far and wide across Birmingham. Annabelle, it's great to have you with us. Do you want to tell us a bit more about what you do in more detail at Stress Free HR? I love the name, by the way, Stress Free. I think we'd all aspire for Stress Free HR, wouldn't we?
Indeed. And when I was setting up my business, thinking, oh gosh, what should I call it? What should I call it? And someone once said to me, well, what's the type of service you want to deliver? And I thought, well, actually, so many people think HR is stressful, and I don't think it needs to be. I think a lot of the stress comes from a lack of education, a lack of knowing what you can and can't do. And when my clients work with me, they don't have a stressful experience. I take on some of the stress, admittedly, but for them, it is a stress-free environment, and it works quite well. And it's a talking subject, actually, when I introduce my business. So people tend to
Brilliant.
laugh.
Very similar synergies to what we do here at Action Coach. It's about working alongside business owners to help remove some of that stress and give clarity about ways forward and how they can build and grow their business. I love the synergy there. And I think in particular this lunchtime, we're going to be talking a bit more about, those business owners. And I can think of many in the back of my mind that I've worked with over the past few years who have been a solopreneur and are taking that first step, or maybe even their second step into recruiting one or two employees and bringing people, and either to outsource, or more importantly, I guess we're talking this lunchtime about bringing them onto their own payroll and becoming an employer for the very first time. That can be quite a daunting task, I guess, Annabella, couldn't it?
It really is, and there's so many reasons why people don't take that first step, and it's about addressing those particular issues. So things like not understanding what the true cost of a role is, or perhaps they've tried before, they had a really bad experience and they think, oh, what's the point? Or they're worried about when if they take someone on and suddenly business slows down and they don't have money to pay them. I've heard it so many times, I can just about pay myself, but I know I need somebody else in the business. So what happens if then I can't afford to pay them? So it stops them from taking that first step.
Yes, and there's one thing that I comes up again and again in my conversations with with clients and business owners, and it's a four-letter word called fear. And
Yeah.
we describe that here at Action Coach as false expectations appearing real. It's that, what if it doesn't quite go right? And there was a lovely quote actually I found online as we were preparing for this lunchtime. It's that there is no good or bad experience in recruitment, is there? It's just a learning experience. And sometimes we have to dip that toe in the water and take that first step. But yes, in every aspect of business, and HR is just one area, recruitment is just one area. It's that fear that holds us back. It holds us all back from taking that next step. And there's only one way of overcoming fear, isn't there, Annabella? And that's just getting on with it.
Just do it.
Just do it. Exactly. So from a recruitment point of view, what sort of things, you've touched on a couple, what sort of things are sort of, do you think the key barriers of putting people off becoming an employee for the first time?
I think some of the things are things like I'm already so busy, I don't have the time to recruit. That's often something that puts them off from just starting, because they just don't know where to start. And they're already overwhelmed with how much they're doing in their business themselves, that the thought of taking time out to properly scope the role and to figure out who they need, to then interview, to then, wait for them to start. They think that they don't have that time already, but actually by not doing it, they're not helping themselves or their business. So that's usually an interesting one. It's really interesting because now with IR35 coming in as well, a lot of people who have been using freelancers under the misguidance that they weren't employees, I think the reality they'll find is that the relationships they've had is that of an employee. So it's important that that's recognised now, because the repercussions for that can be quite severe if they're caught out with that.
Yeah, Annabella, for those who are listening and perhaps wondering, what IR35 is, you have to just share a bit more detail about how that works and what it is in practice for the layperson or the new employer, the new business owner.
Yeah, so this existed already, right? And a lot of people need to realise that the IR35 regulations that have come in are just about cementing the government's way of clamping down, let's say, on poor practices that existed in the past. So when you use a freelancer, there was always a check that HMRC would do anyway if you were investigated to determine whether or not they had a true kind of self-employed status versus an employee status. And that all comes down to the relationship and the control that the employer has over the person who's doing the work for them. So things like, do you brand them, give them uniform that's got your branding on it? That's a clear sign to the revenue that they're actually being treated like employees. Do they request holiday from you? And do you dictate to them when they do their work? That was another clear sign to them that that this was more of an employer relationship rather than a self-employed relationship. Are you their only client? Again, another clear indication. And these things already existed. The IR35 rules are more focused to businesses that the relationship, the onus of determining the status falls to the company if they have over 50 employees or a turnover, I think it's of 10.2 million. That's the determination that needs to be done by the company if they meet that criteria. But if the company doesn't meet that criteria, so let's say me, for example, if I provide services to a business that's 40 employees, for example, I, as the supplier, will need to make my own IR35 determination in respect of that relationship. And so I think a lot of freelancers, let's say, might get caught out by that because they don't realize that they have that responsibility.
Right.
So it is quite an interesting interesting area, and I would suggest that people do a bit more research themselves, because I'm by far no expert on that particular topic.
Right. It's a useful point to be thinking and considering. And I guess lockdown for yesterday was a day of national reflection, wasn't it, Annabella? And it got me thinking about some of the businesses I've worked with. Most of them are thriving and surviving. There's been one or two casualties, sadly. And I'm sure all of us know of people who have had to experience furlough over the last 12 months. In terms of a business that's perhaps struggled and had to trim their fat over the last 12 months, what sort of advice would you be giving them right now in terms of employing people? Is the market out there at the moment a good one to be recruiting from? In terms of, I guess there's still a lot of people on furlough. What are your thoughts and advice around that?
Yeah, so obviously the government put in place measures to help businesses not make mass redundancies, right? Because that's what effectively the furlough scheme was introduced for. And unfortunately, I've had several of my clients that even with that level of support, they've struggled. So I have a hotel client, for example, that at the end of lockdown 1 made 60 redundancies out of a workforce of 135. In November at lockdown 2, they decided to close their doors until they can reopen, and they're reopening in May. And the reason for that was because they were making an £80,000 loss a month just by staying open. Whereas this way they were able to, take a temporary pause, utilising the furlough scheme, and then hopefully hit the ground running again when they can reopen, which looks like that's what they're going to do. And for people who work in the hospitality, events and retail industries, have obviously taken a massive hit, and some of those, they won't come back. And I've seen it, particularly the limited company directors who have maintained their businesses open for their staff because they can claim the furlough, but haven't been able to really do much for their own income. So there's been a difficulty in that part, because it's not just the furlough scheme preventing job losses in that respect, but it's about recognizing that, you know, if your business has business rates and you're not getting any support in that respect, then they're not going to survive either. So there are many challenges out there that aren't just specifically staff related. In terms of the businesses that are looking to reopen now, then there will be lots of concerns from their employees about what that looks like. And you'll know this yourself, Stephen, because you coach around teams and engagement and things like that.
Absolutely.
That communication is the biggest thing that you can do to help your staff. Just communicating with them what the plans are, what safety measures you've put in place for them to feel safe about coming back to work, listening to the concerns of those employees who aren't ready to come back to work, and understanding why that is, and whether or not there are ways that you can work around that suits both the business and the employee. Because at the end of the day, if you've had an employee working for you for many years, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Annabella, and I think there's a huge amount of opportunity and for businesses, for business owners, and for employers, organisations across the UK to sort of do what I would call a team realignment. You know, people are coming together. I haven't seen my colleagues here at Action Coach face to face since March last year. And I really do think that, you know, there's that opportunity to bring people together to look at new ways of working, for business owners and managers to talk about the direction of travel of the business and how the business has been impacted, to be open and to share the journey, and to talk about how they can realign together, to work together to take the business where it needs to go, you know, either back to where it was, in many cases on a new journey, in a new way of doing business going forwards. And also there's going to be a new ways of working. I suspect many organizations are not going to have people in the office 9 till 5, Monday to Friday, full time. There's going to be a sort of a hybrid approach for many people. We've got used to a new norm, haven't we? But I absolutely agree. I think there's that team realignment is so important right now to bring people back together. But I guess we're sort of going off topic a bit, but sorry, before I go back, but any thoughts on that, Annabella?
Well, I was just going to say that it's interesting, when lockdown 1 happened, I had an interesting conversation with my husband, and I said to him, the notion that people are going to be working from home will result in a lot more flexible working requests, because in the past, you know, there has been I don't want to call it an excuse, but the almost the validation that the job can't be done from home. And it's just been proven that a lot of it can in certain industries and in certain roles. So I think that will bring a challenge for business owners, particularly where a request is made, where it's been demonstrated that it has worked, and what valid reason are they going to use to say that you can't, if that flexible working request comes in. So I think each case needs to be taken on its own merits. And as I said before, communication and having that conversation is really important.
Absolutely, communication is key, and I say that we've been saying that since day one of lockdown this time last year. Just before we carry on, for those who are just joining us, whether you're on Facebook or Zoom or LinkedIn, we're here, Action Coach Lunch and Live here in Birmingham. We're talking to Annabella Ewell, all about, you know, being a first-time employer, recruiting your first employees in your business. So if you have any questions, please do put them in the comments box. And I'm also going to take a shameless plug at this point, Annabella. We've just been talking about team realignments. It's something we love to do here at Action Coach. So if you're listening to us this lunchtime and, you know, you're thinking about how do you bring your team back together, you know, what differences have there been in the team and how you deliver your service or business, please do give ourselves a call. We'd love to have that conversation. I've also got a question, Annabella, from Jack, who's been listening to us. He says he's now at the stage where he wants to start thinking about his first employee. What pitfalls should he avoid? So Jack, thank you for your question. Annabella, over to you. What are the pitfalls of taking on that first employee? What should he be avoiding?
So one of the things that I see happen a lot is the whole bum on seat. So I don't know if you know what I mean by that, but it is literally, I need someone yesterday. And because that need is there, you compromise on so many other things. What I usually recommend is that you work backwards. So if you think about when you've offered somebody the job, they usually have to give notice. So you're looking at perhaps a month's notice, right? Yes. So if you take that month's notice and then you think, well, I've got an interview, and that can take 2-3 weeks. So we'll add that to the timeline. Then you need to advertise. So you need to give people time to apply. You need to sift through their responses. So you could be looking at another 2-3 weeks there. Before you advertise, you need to put your job description together. So that takes your time as well. And you have to write your advert. So we'll add another week for that. So when you add it all up, I'd say that you need a good 6 months before you're ready for that person to start, for you to give yourself the time to do it properly. Because if you don't do it properly, you end up compromising with things like, whether they're the right fit for your business, whether or not they have the right skill set, because you're in a rush. And I really recommend when you're making your first hire, particularly when you're making your first hire, because you want it to be a positive experience, right? Because if you have a negative experience, you become one of those people that I spoke earlier about that don't go ahead because you've had a bad experience. Yes. So definitely giving yourself sufficient time to plan and execute that first hire is really, really important.
There we go.
I like your slide.
It's as if we talked already and we haven't necessarily shown the slide already, but if you're looking for the blue duck, take your time to find it. I've spent 15 years working in public sector, Annabella, and I have seen recruitment programs where somebody's recruited somebody because they need the bum on the seat, and they've made the wrong decision. And then it's usually a further 6 to 12 months before that wrong decision comes to light in terms of the performance or the skill set. And then you've got to go through a process of that person exiting the organization. And you're almost putting yourself back 18 months because of a desperate decision to recruit at that time. So, I would say it's better not to recruit at all than to recruit
the wrong person.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Go on.
No, if I'm just looking at, Jack asked about the pitfalls.
Yes.
You'll know through what you do at Action Coach that things like company culture and values are really important.
Absolutely.
And they're not just important for how you deliver things to your clients and your customers, but they're really important to have established before you start recruiting.
Yes.
Because you can recruit for skill and experience, absolutely. But if you don't recruit for culture and values as well, then you potentially recruit people that don't have the same values as your business. So if we take attention to detail as a particular value, if you deliver a particular service that you tell your clients you have excellent attention to detail, but you recruit someone who doesn't have attention to detail as one of their values, the likelihood is that you won't be delivering the service through them in the way that you want them to, which then leads to performance management and uncomfortable conversations, and then possibly not passing their probation period, which puts you back to square one. So having things like your culture and values already established before you start thinking about who you want to recruit is particularly an important area to have already set up.
I'm loving this conversation, Annabella. It's as if you've been on one of our business health check courses, or, I often talk about destination and having that vision, but most importantly, the points of culture, because that is such an important part of attracting talent to your organization. And another point, we've been reading a book, not recently, about 6 months ago. I don't know if you've come across it, called The Purpose Revolution by John Izzo. And it's a fascinating book. And it talks all about how, dare I say, the younger generation than me, who are, those in their sort of 20s, early 30s, the purpose and the values of an organization is as important as the job nowadays. And that's, people are attracted to an organization as much for the purpose and values as it is the job itself. And so it's so important to get that right, and to make sure that you've got those in place at that early stage, so that filters through. I mean, we're not talking about marketing today, but it impacts on your marketing, impacts on your recruitment. And so absolutely knowing your points of culture, your values, whatever you want to call them, is crucial.
Agreed.
So that was a great question from John. Any other things that people should be considering in those first few times? You said about planning, having that plan. You said, was it 6 months, Annabelle, you were saying, to lead in time, really?
Yeah, so you should think about 6 months before you're ready for them to start is when you should start thinking about it, and putting together that job description and being clear in that job description about what the role is. Because what I find also with first-time employers is that they've got a list of things they don't like to do. And they know that, let's say that they need someone to come in and focus on their marketing, but suddenly that marketing role is also the finance role, the PA role, and everything else that they can kind of shift over to somebody else. But actually, when you put that job description together, when you look at it and you think to yourself, well, how am I going to find this one person who's going to be able to do all of this? So being clear about why you're recruiting that particular role, and if there are some tasks or jobs that can be, there's crossover that the skill set can allow for, then fine. But just to be careful that you don't suddenly just create a job of a mishmash of things that actually in the long run, you're not going to find somebody who can do them all. And I think that's quite important.
I've got a question from Sundeep here. It sort of links into that a bit about what we've been saying, Annabella. She's saying, how much should skills versus behaviors, in terms of, should you be looking for somebody who's nice and I guess I'm sort of summarizing this for you, Sundeep, but are we looking for somebody who's nice, who's got the interpersonal skills versus somebody who knows how to technically do the job? Where would that balance, where should that balance be? How would you go about balancing out?
And that's a really good question. So if the job is very technical, that you need that experience or that qualification for, then 100% that's necessary. But I often say that you can teach skill, you can't change someone's values. So that's really important to understand when you're looking for a particular role, what's more important, or if someone is lacking a particular skill that you can teach them, or that they can on a course that's affordable for the business, you can upskill them, then in my opinion, it's better to focus on the values and the culture side, getting someone with the right attitude, the right values that link in with your business values will reap far better rewards for your business than finding somebody who's just technically able to do the job. So that's my view on that.
Brilliant. Thank you. I think I completely agree with you. I think you've got to make sure you've got somebody who's got the basic skill set. But then, in my experience of recruiting in the past, if you've got two people level pegging, then yes, I completely agree, Annabella. You can teach somebody, you can put them on a training course and give them the technical input, but values and behaviours are so important. But thank you, Sunderbeck. I think it's an excellent question, really astute question. Jack's just come back to, he said, yeah, he completely agrees about having a plan. Are there what are the key milestones in that plan? So he's looking to take on his first employee. What should he do first?
So first, identify what you need, right? So that's putting your job description together, understanding what you're recruiting for. You can't write your advert until you know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
So you start off with writing your job description, and then from there you can go and write your advert. There was a really interesting report done by Hewlett-Packard about 6 or 7 years ago, I think it was, that basically did a study that if you use masculine language in your advert, like assertive or independent, you'll find that you're less likely to have women apply, rather than if you use the words like dedicated and responsible. And it's really important to have learned from the study as well, that if a man reads a job advert and ticks 60% of the requirements, he'll likely apply. Whereas a woman, technically, if she sees about 90% of the job role, will apply, but anything less than 90%, she probably won't. So when you're writing your advert, just be mindful of what you're including as the needs or would likes. Yeah, because you might put people off by your language.
Exactly. I think it's a great point.
So write your advert, and then obviously decide where you want to advertise that. So there's lots of different places you can advertise that, and then put together what you're going to use as your shortlisting criteria. So and the subject of today is more what was supposed to be more around the legal side, and we'll come back to the legal
I was just going to
side.
come on to that in a moment, but yeah, carry on.
Yeah, that's fine. So in terms of your advert, you need to be mindful that the language in the advert isn't discriminatory. So if you're looking for people of a particular age, then you need to be able to justify it. So let's say that it's a role that requires driving, then it would make sense that you would need people that are of driving age. And so as long as you can justify why you're choosing to advertise for the specific characteristics, let's say, of people, that might include age or race or something like that, then it's important that you can be able to justify it should you be challenged. So you do your advert, you then shortlist. I always advise that you have a shortlisting criteria and you score it in a matrix.
Yeah.
This way you can justify why you came to the decision you came to. Then you should prepare your
It comes back for feedback. You know, I've asked for feedback before, and I've had candidates ask me for feedback. It's much easier if you've got a clear criteria you can demonstrate that you've judged against, and it's much easier to provide that feedback if you're happy to do so.
Yeah, exactly. But it's more for protection, let's say, for the business owner, because if they get challenged in a tribunal, for example, about their decision-making process, then they have something to rely on to show why they came to that decision. If your scribbles are across a CV, one, you might have written the wrong thing, which is never a good thing. And two, you can't show why you came to your decision if you've just got scribbles across a CV. And the same goes for your interviews. So once you've shortlisted, you then invite for interview. And before your interview, you should prepare all your questions. And you should ask every individual that comes for an interview the same questions. How people elaborate from that question is down to them. And that will determine how you then make notes about the answer to that question. But by asking the same question to everybody, you're following a fair process because they all have the opportunity to answer the same question.
It reminds me, Annabella, of a question, a comment a manager of mine said many years ago, that the secondary questions are far more important than the primary ones. You can have the same set of primary. It's when you start to drill down that you really start to unpack what the candidate in front of you has got to share or got to say.
Exactly.
There's also another phrase that somebody said to me a long time ago: it's much easier to hire than it is to fire. And that's why it's so important to make sure the recruitment process is you know, the best it can be. But in terms of legal compliance, I guess that's something else that puts people off, particularly small business owners, first-time employers. You know, what are the key legal requirements that we need to be considering when taking on that first employee in particular? Because I guess once you've done one, you should have them in place for future recruiting.
Yes.
But for the first-time employer, it could be quite overwhelming.
Yes, and that is one of the things that puts them off, right? Is that they're afraid to break the law. Because they don't know, because it's that education piece. They just don't know what they don't know. Yeah,
we just throw GDPR, we throw equality and diversity and all those things, and I can you know, I can feel it now, you know, sort of coming towards me. And I can imagine as a small business owner, you've got to run the business. You desperately need someone to work with you, but it can seem overwhelming.
So I run a HR MOT for some of my new micro business clients, and one of the questions I ask them is, are you aware that you don't actually have to be an employee to bring a claim at the employment tribunal? And 95% of the time they say they're not aware. So you don't actually have to be employed to bring a claim to the tribunal, because you don't need to have a minimum amount of service to bring a discrimination claim. So if in your recruitment process someone alleges that they've been discriminated against, you might not have even offered them the job, and they can still take you to court, which is why it's really important to have those records to be able to demonstrate why you came to the decision you came to in respect of your candidates. So that's probably the first place to start, which is a good thing. But that shouldn't put you off becoming a first-time employer, because you know, that's just a protection that's there, which is rightly there for people, right? That's what the Equality Act is for.
That's also what people like yourselves, Annabella, are here for. You know, with every aspect of your business, you're not alone, you know. And if you've got queries about, you know, marketing, about recruitment, HR, finance, there are people like ourselves, like you, who are here to help business owners stay on the right track.
Absolutely. Okay, so in terms of your legal requirements to become an employer for the first time, there are 7 things that you need to do. And these bits of information are readily available on the gov.uk website. So if you went to www.gov.uk, I believe the website is, and just Google and just put in the search employer for the first time, it will bring up these legal requirements. So people can go back and check a bit more detail if they want to know a bit more. So the first thing that you need to do is make sure that you're paying them the minimum wage. So at the moment, the national minimum wage is in place, and you have the national living wage, which is for employees who are over the age of 25. It's important to note that that's going to change in April. So in April,
sorry, interrupt you. Sandeep's just asking what is the difference between the two. I don't know if you're going to cover that, but just
yeah. So the national minimum wage is up to a certain age group, and then the national living wage has to be paid over a certain age group.
Right.
Okay. The national living wage was for people over 25, and the national minimum wage had to be for people under 25. And there's different levels within those different categories as well.
Really helpful. Thank you.
That's fine. But what's key to note is that from the 1st of April, the national living wage, which was for the over 25s, is now reducing for the over 23s. So I appreciate that a lot of our viewers today are businesses thinking of taking on their first employee. But if there's anybody on the call who has come along to just check perhaps that they're compliant, then if they are paying the national living wage to 25s and over, if they have anybody who is 23 or 24, they will need to go back to their payroll records to make sure that they make the change from the 1st of April. That's quite
important. Applies to people already on the payroll.
Yes, yes. So if you're recruiting after April, then if they're 23 or over, you must pay at least the living wage from the age of 23. If you already have employees who are 23 or 24, and you are paying the living wage from 25, then you must go and check your records to make sure that you make the appropriate change from April.
And if you're not sure what those amounts are on gov.uk, you can go and find out.
Yeah, you can just go check them. Yeah, that's
okay.
there.
So minimum wage, point number 1, brilliant.
Yeah. So the next point is around the legal right to work in the UK. So employers are a bit like, well, they're already tax collectors for the Inland Revenue, right? They collect tax from their employees, but they also work for the Home Office, let's say, to check that people have the right to work in this country. So so what they must do is they must check that their nationality gives them the right to work in this country. Now, obviously, we've got Brexit now. That's happened.
Yes.
Which has caused a load of issues around this subject as well. So, so pre-December, you were able to just check their passport. If they were in the EU, EEA, or a Swiss national, their passport or identity card would be sufficient. And you take a copy of that on their first day of employment, and you certify it, and you write on it, I certify this as a true copy, you date it, and that was your evidence that you had done your duty in this respect. Obviously, those who can apply for settled status should be doing that, and they have until I believe the 30th of June to finalise all of those details. So if somebody is from the EU, you can still validate their right to work by checking their passport, and you have obviously, you can still do that up until the 30th. Once the 1st of July comes, you don't need to go back and retrospectively check anybody's ID or that they've got settled status or anything like that. But from the 1st of July, there is a code that if you do have settled status, you provide to your employer that they can then check that you have settled status. And that is the way that you check that they have the right to work in the UK if they're from the EU. If they don't have settled status and they're not a UK national, then you will have to apply for a sponsor license in order to employ someone who's not from the UK or doesn't have settled status. And again, that's not something to go into much more detail at the moment about, just because it's quite a big subject.
Yeah,
and if anybody does want to recruit anybody from outside of the EU, or if anybody wants to recruit somebody who's not a UK national and doesn't have settled status, then they really need to look into that now, because there are costs attached to it and stuff like that. And you need to make sure that you are prepared to pay out those costs as part of your recruitment of your first employee. So that's quite important. So that's number 2. Number 3 is around DBS checks. So for those that you don't know, that stands for Disclosure and Barring Service. And this is where you do a check of the criminal record that someone might have. It's not necessary for every job, but if let's say, for example, you're in the trades and you go and do work in schools, then the staff that you send to do that work would need to be DBS checked. You know, some healthcare professions as well require it. So it's not applicable to every industry or every role, but it's important that if it is, the check is done.
Claire's just asking, how do they know which jobs are and are not applicable for a DBS check? Is there any sort of standard guidance, Annabella, or is it again going to do a bit more research online?
Yeah, I would suggest that they do a bit more research online. It's not a service that I offer particularly, although I do have alliances with other companies that do this service for my clients. But you could, you know, again, when you look up the legal requirements on the gov.uk website, it will give you some more guidance around some examples of the type of roles. But if you think about it, typically it's children, vulnerable adults. Yeah. You know, if you're working in the prison service, I would expect that. You know, so it will depend on who the employee is providing services to as part of your business. That's ultimately what it will come down to.
I guess one of the fears, I've had conversations with clients of my own, you know, about recruiting, is that you go and in the absence of knowledge, you ask too many questions or the wrong questions, and that's when you start getting into difficult. So do the research first, I guess, is a key point, isn't it? Make sure, or seek advice from somebody like yourself, or, you know, go online.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, right, if you can justify why you're asking a question, 9 times out of 10, you should be all right. But you need to have a legitimate reason for asking the question. It can't be a "I would like to know" kind of question. There needs to be a good business reason for needing to ask the question. So like I said in the example of the driving, you know, if your van insurance, for example, only allows you to insure people over the age of 21 or 23, depending on what the premiums are like, and the restrictions, then there's nothing wrong with in the interview saying, you know, for this particular role, we require someone of this age and above because of the insurance premium. Do you meet that criteria? So you're not outright saying to them, "How old are you?" You're explaining why you need it and asking them to confirm whether or not they meet the criteria. So there's ways of asking something without outright being discriminatory, let's say.
Brilliant. That's really helpful. So that's all about, so we've got minimum wage, legal right to work, DBS checks. We're doing well. We're doing well.
So the next one is about
getting the right advice, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. The next one's around assurance. So when you become an employer, you need employer's liability insurance. The policies, they need to cover at least £5 million and need to be from an authorised insurer. The main point to note is that if you're not insured, you could be liable for a fine of £2,500 for every day that you're not properly insured. So that's a hefty fine.
That is a huge amount, isn't it?
It is a huge amount. And I didn't mention it earlier, but in terms of the right to work check, if you're not able to produce the right to work check, and someone doesn't have the right to work in this country, that's a £20,000 fine per employee. So again, They're quite hefty fines, but they're there for a good reason, right? Because they're legal requirements, they're needed. So yeah. They can be quite costly.
The key thing is to be aware of this now. So again, we said earlier on in this Lunch and Learn webinar, you can plan for it. Hence what we said earlier on about, you know, planning, plan, and you should be fine. But anyway,
and employers liability insurance, it's not always very expensive either. It depends on your industry and the risks. So it just, it just doesn't make sense to not get it sorted out. If, it's going to be a far lot cheaper than £2,500 a day. I can trust.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So moving on, so we have the job details that you need to send to the new employee. So some people call this the contract of employment. It's not the same. So we call this the written statement of particulars, although some businesses do issue a contract of employment instead. The difference is that the contract has more information within it, but it will also contain all of the details from the written statement of particulars. So, a lot of my clients just get a drafted contract of employment template, and that's what they issue to the new employee. So in April 2020, the law changed. April 2020, you had 8 weeks to issue the written statement of particulars. That changed to being needed. You need to issue that now on the first day of employment and no later than the first day of employment. And there's the bare minimum that you need to include. So things like the employer's name, the employee's name, and the job title or the description of the work, and the start date, the hours and days of work, and if they vary, how they vary, and including in there if they need to work Sundays, nights, overtime, that kind of stuff. Holiday entitlement, and whether that includes bank holidays. So some contracts or written statements say 20 days plus 8 bank holidays. Others will say 28 days, including bank holidays. So understanding how that affects your business is important about how you then
absolutely
describe it to the employee.
Quick question again.
So we've got holiday, and then where they're working. Sorry.
Yeah, so quick question. Jack's just asking, in terms of, you talked about written statement of particulars. He's saying, at what stage do you draft the job spec, person spec?
So the written statement of particulars isn't the job description.
No. I think he understands that. He's saying, at what stage do you draft that? Is that something you would do before that, or is that part of? Is that
so the job description and the person spec comes right at the beginning.
Right.
Yeah. The written statement of particulars is only needed on the first day they start.
For the successful candidate. Yeah.
For the successful candidate. So you would ordinarily have it ready before they've been chosen, so that it's ready to be issued. But this isn't. It's funny because I get a lot of customers and clients come to me saying, I need a contract of employment. And then I say to them, okay, well, where are you in the recruitment process, particularly the first timers? And they say, oh, I haven't even started yet. And I'm like, well, why do you need a contract now? You've got a load of work that you need to be doing beforehand. This isn't your priority. So the written statement of particulars, or contract, however you want to refer to it, is needed, but it's not your first port of call. This is just confirming what the job is going to be about and what the expectations are, and outlining the relationship between employer and employee.
Yeah, perfect.
So
that helps you, Jack. Yeah.
So in addition to the holiday entitlement, you have the work location. You have if it's a fixed term contract, how long the job is expected to last. If there's a probation period, and if so, if there are any conditions to passing the probation period. Whether you offer any other benefits, that needs to go in, and whether you have any obligatory training that's required at the point when the contract starts. Some of those changes were also introduced in April, so that's effectively what you need to include within that document between you and the employee as a bare minimum.
If there is training required before somebody starts, is that who's liable for the funding? Is it, I presume, the employer?
Yeah. So let's say that one of the conditions of the probation is that they are required to complete a certain amount of training. Then you would include that in the probation conditions, and you would also include it in the training section of the contract. Right.
Brilliant. That's really helpful. Thank you.
So another legal requirement is that you register with HMRC to be an employer. So they need to know that you've employed someone, and you just register as an employer. You can do this up to 4 weeks in advance of paying somebody, but no more than 2 months before you pay them. But it must be done before you pay somebody for the first time.
Right.
Yeah, so that's really important.
And in terms of that payment, you may be coming to cover this, Annabella, but most of my clients, it's done via their accountants. Is that best and standard practice? Is there any other ways of actually running the payroll?
Yeah, so I mean, I when I set up my business, I put myself down as employed, and I did my payroll to start off with. I registered with the revenue, got my PAYE employer's reference, and I used Xero, and I did it through Xero. So you can do it. The challenges that you face with doing your own payroll is that if you don't understand payroll, if you don't understand P45s, tax codes, and things like that, then you won't be able to spot if you make a mistake. Whereas if you give it to your accountant to do, or, you know, I provide payroll services as an addition to my business. So if you give it to someone whose profession is to do that job, then hopefully you shouldn't have any problems, because they won't be making mistakes. The mistakes come, again, through lack of understanding, lack of knowledge, and therefore you can't identify that you haven't ticked the right box or put the right details somewhere. And let me tell you, when you mess up someone's pay, you will get a very unhappy employee.
Yes, it's you know, a key point, isn't it? I think we've all been employees at some point in our lives, and you know, that's what many people are employed, what motivates them.
Yes, exactly.
It's important to get that right.
So, and then we've got one more legal compliance, which is around the pension. So back in 2012, the government introduced auto-enrolment, and there was a period where it was phased depending on the business size. That's all gone now, and now it's in place. So once you become an employer for the first time, you must set up a workplace pension scheme. Whether or not your employee qualifies is irrelevant, because even if they don't qualify, they still have the right to request to pay into the pension scheme. So it needs to be available in order to do that. There are some criteria for auto-enrolment. So you need to be aged between 22 and state pension age. They need to earn at least £10,000 a year, and they need to ordinarily work in the UK. So if they meet that criteria, they should be auto-enrolled. Whether they want to be or not, they still need to be auto-enrolled. Once they're auto-enrolled, they can then opt out themselves. But it's really important that business owners don't discourage it, don't give pension advice. You know, they're not regulated by the FCA. So, you know, they get auto-enrolled. If they want to drop out, they drop out. If they don't, then they stay in the pension. Contribution levels are 3% for the employer, 5% for the employee. And it can either be done as a net payment out their salary, or they can do it as a salary sacrifice. But again, you know, if you've got a payroll provider, or if you've got an accountant, ordinarily they should be able to help you set these schemes up. Most SMEs go with a nest pension or something done by the People's Pension, so they're fairly easy to set up. You know, and you write to your employees to inform them that they're being auto-enrolled. And then if they opt out, you are required to re-enroll them every 3 years. And they can opt out again once they're re-enrolled.
A useful point.
Yeah. Which obviously, if you're employing for the first time, you're not really thinking about 3 years' time. But it's good to know that, you know, if they do opt out, then you are required to re-enroll them.
Yes. And
then they can opt out again.
That's really helpful. So 7 really clear points for any first-time employer. And I guess we may still well have listeners who are thinking this is all too much. Annabella, if that's the case, there's organisations like yours, I'm sure, that can help guide them along that process.
Yeah, so I do a particularly so I niched my business in December to focus on employers taking on their first employee and micro businesses. And one of the things that I deliver is a first employee workshop. And I did this exercise for a client recently. And one of the enlightening moments for him was actually the true cost of a role. You know, often employers or new employers, they see salary and they think that's the truth, that's the only cost. But actually there are lots of other costs that are involved, you know, as well as the usual employers NI and pension contributions and liability insurance, which are the things that you have to pay. You know, considering HR support to help you get your contracts in place, those policies, you know, considering the cost of your individual time. So as a business owner, assign a cost to the time you're going to take to do all of this, because it's important that you factor that in, because your time is important. You know, looking at laptops and subscription fees, phones, business cards. So there's lots and lots of other things that must be factored in, because if you don't factor it in, the likelihood is that you will get an unpleasant surprise later on. And then those fears that you had that you couldn't afford them, they come creeping back because you didn't plan properly. Absolutely. So, you know, just always keeps going back to that planning, right?
It does, absolutely comes back to planning. And, you know, again, I've talked to many clients. It's not just, you know, well, partly, first of all, Annabella, it's about valuing time, putting a cost on your own head, and valuing your time as part of this process. Some of these things are keen to get right first time. So such things as having a handbook. We talked earlier on about communication styles and communication tools and methods. All of these things need to be considered, you know, for the first time when you take your first employee. Once you've done it once, get it right. It makes it much easier then to grow the business and take on your next, second, third, fourth employee. But it's important to take the time out to invest that time in your business and yourself by getting it right first time.
It is. And don't forget as well, right, that most people who come to work for you have worked somewhere else. So if they had policies and procedures and they're coming to work for you and you don't have them, they might think, well, what kind of cowboys am I coming to work for? You know, and so, you know, and you're right, getting those things done right at the beginning just means it's done. And then, you know, I mean, I can't tell you how many micro businesses I talk to who I ask them, how many staff have you got? Oh, 3 or 4. How many, do they have contracts? No. Have you got any policies? No. And I think to myself, well, why didn't it happen right at the beginning? Why now? You know, and they've come to me because they got problems. And that's the point. Do it from the beginning properly, understand what you need to do, get the education, and actually it should be plainer sailing later on.
And yeah, I completely agree. And 95% of business owners, I would say, have been an employee at some point in their lives themselves. So think back, if you can, as to when you were the employee and what systems and what process and what information you relied on. And as a business owner, you know, think back to when you first opened your business. Think about the number of changes you made when it was just yourself, and anticipate change, plan for change, and get it right first time. I keep coming to that point. You know, we've got on the screen here, don't panic, plan. And I talk about that in terms of marketing, in terms of finance, in terms of business generally. It's so important to apply that same principle, isn't it, to recruitment and employing other people, because ultimately these are big decisions, not only for you but for the candidate or the employee that you're going to take on, and you want to get it right so you can really cement that working relationship and ultimately empower that employee to do the job they're employed to do, and not worry about the detail of handbooks and getting systems and processes, because you've got it right, you've thought it through.
Absolutely.
One other question from, I'm conscious of time, we've got about 5 minutes left. One other very quick question. In terms of recruitment, you've gone through the process, you've been successful, you've selected the person, you've got all these CVs in your hand. I mentioned the very words earlier on, GDPR, data protection. What can we do with those, Annabelle? I know we've only got a few minutes left, but what would you suggest?
Yeah, that's fine. So under GDPR, you have to have a legitimate reason for keeping something. So unless you've got a specific policy that says that you can hold it for longer, and you share that with the candidate and they agree to it, then you should be getting rid of their CV. You know, your legitimate purpose for having it at the time was your recruitment process, which they applied for the job. Once that job has been filled, what legitimate reason do you have for keeping it? There is none. Unless you go to the candidate and say to them, look, unfortunately, on this occasion, you weren't the successful candidate, but I did really like your CV, or you interviewed well, or whatever the reason might be. I would like to keep your CV for a further X amount of time, and you should be specific about that time in order that should another opportunity arise, I can get back in touch with you. And you do that on email so that you get their permission in writing, and then you attach that, you know, wherever it is that you keep the CV, you keep the permission. Just in case at a later date they then claim that they didn't give you permission, and then you can prove that they did. But you shouldn't be keeping it unless you have a legitimate reason for keeping it.
Thank you so much, Annabella. I've just as you're answering that question, I'm thinking we could do a whole hour just on an application form or a job description, couldn't we? I'm sure you pack so much into your workshops. Before we end, I guess, well, not guess, I would love to give you the opportunity just to tell us a bit more about how you do support business owners in that first time recruitment process, any of the workshops you're running or planning to run in the future. So another shameless plug from you, Annabella. Go ahead.
Thank you. So as I said, my area of expertise is around the employer taking on their first employee, and also micro businesses. So for the employer, the first time employer, let's call it, then like I said, I do my workshop, and that often it has some blinding flashes of the obvious, as you described them. And out of the workshop, they get the job description, the advert, some questions, a summary of the 2.5-hour Zoom call, and they're clear about where they're next going. And obviously, I can then support them around the contracts and the handbooks. Once they've done that, then it's the probation period and onboarding them and the induction process, and helping them put all of that together so that it's clear. On the micro business side, I do all of that other stuff. But the key thing that I do for the micro businesses that's really helpful is my HR MOT, which basically is an hour Zoom call. I go through a list of questions, I educate them there and then, and they get a report back that is color coded, red, amber, or green, where they can see immediately whatever areas that they are perhaps not compliant with, that they need to plug. And it's a very well spent hour where they learn and put things in place to get things back up to speed. So
Brilliant.
Those are two good areas to focus on.
Fantastic. And when we talk about BFOs, blinding flashes the obvious, there's information we're always sharing on these lunch and learns. I've heard you say to me, Annabella, and I'm sure if I said things to you that we already know, it's often about just putting them in an order that we can make sense of them and connecting those bits of information together to get a process right. And that's what's so important in recruitment, isn't it? If you're interested in anything that Annabella has said in terms of the workshops, the HR reports, etc., you know, her contact details, her website. I didn't have a chance to put your LinkedIn. There wasn't enough space to put your LinkedIn in your Facebook, but I know you are on LinkedIn, so do go and look Annabella up on LinkedIn as well. You know, please do get in touch. There's a whole range of support that Annabella and her colleagues at Stress Free HR can offer you if you're thinking and contemplating taking on that first employee. Again, very similar to Annabella, we here at Action Coach, we've talked a bit about team alignment. We'd love to have that conversation with you, bringing your teams back together for the first time in 12 months, or members of the team back to join others. Equally, we also have free business health workshops, and we've got our 30X program, which for business owners, for solopreneurs, particularly who may be listening this lunchtime, it's only £50, and that gives you your growth club, 30 videos, 15 hours of videos, book club, and the networking opportunity as well once a fortnight. So loads packed in there. If you'd like to find out more about our solopreneurs package, then please get in touch with me and we can tell you more. We'd love to offer anybody on this Lunch and Learn a free coaching session, as I'm sure Annabella would also love to have that conversation, that first consultation. I'm going to leave our contact details up there. We've just come up to the hour, Annabella, so I just want to say thank you so much. And it feels like we need to get together again on one of these and perhaps look into a different aspect of this. There's so much, and I'm sure there's questions that we've not been able to answer this lunchtime. Thank you to Claire, to Simon, to Jack, to Sandeep, and anybody else who's got questions. We will reach out to you. Thank you most of all to Annabella Ueli from Stress Free HR. I love the name. I think it's something we all aspire to. If you're listening to this later on, please do comment, please do share it on Facebook, please do connect with us on LinkedIn, and we'd love to have that conversation with you. But for now, stay well, stay safe. Thank you again, Annabella, and we will look forward to you joining us again here at Action Coach in Birmingham for another Lunch and Learn in the coming weeks and months. But take care, stay well, stay safe.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.